Last week we covered Melkor's origins through his destruction of the two trees and flight to Middle-earth. Today we pick up where we left off. Melkor, now known as the Dark Lord Morgoth, returns to his fortress of Angband. After his return to Middle-earth, he is often referred to as Morgoth Bauglir. Bauglir is a Sindarin name, meaning the Constrainer. He sets his sights on the elves that didn't make the journey to Valinor. The Sindar, under King Thingol, live in Doriath. Círdan and the Teleri live at Falas, and Denethor and the Nandor live in Osiriand. Morgoth moves against these elves in the year of the trees 1497, sending his army of orcs to surround Thingol in Doriath. Thingol manages to contact Denethor, who comes to their aid. The orcs of Morgoth, caught between two armies of elves, are defeated. As the orcs flee north, they are unexpectedly routed by the dwarves of Mount Dolmed. The orcs on the western front continue to besiege Círdan's elves at the havens of Falas for the following few months, until the coming of the Noldor would draw them away. Speaking of the Noldor, with the world in darkness, Feanor leads the Noldor to rebel against the Valar. Many of those following Feanor take part in the kinslaying, in which many Teleri are killed so that Feanor may claim their ships. They sail east to Beleriand, landing at Loskar. When Feanor burns the ships, it not only signals to Fingolfin that he and the rest of the Noldor are now stranded in Aman, but also draws the attention of Morgoth. In a preemptive strike, he sends forth a force of orcs and werewolves, which passes through the arid Wethrin and attacks the elves. Though the orcs greatly outnumber the Noldor, the elves possess great power within them, thanks to the light of Valinor. They defeat Morgoth's force. The orcs retreat across the plain of Ardgallen and back toward Angband. At this time, the orcs that had besieged Círdan come north to aid their allies. However, they are pushed back to the Fen of Serek. In total, very few orcs survive the 10-day battle. Feanor pursues this small group to the Dor Daedeloth, the land of the Shadow of Horror. There, the Balrogs come out from Thangorodrim. Feanor fights valiantly against these demons of Morgoth, but is separated from his sons and is fatally wounded by Gothmog, the Lord of Balrogs. The armies of his sons would reach him just in time to drive off the Balrogs, but Morgoth's enemy would die of his wounds soon after. This conflict would come to be known as the Dagor Nuin Gileath, the Battle Under Stars, as it takes place prior to the creation of the sun and moon. With his father dead, Maethrost is now the High King of the Noldor. Morgoth sends an offer of peace to Maethrost, even saying he will surrender a Silmaril. Maethrost does not trust the Dark Lord and brings a force with him to the meeting. Morgoth sends an even greater force and captures Maethrost, the sole survivor of his group. Morgoth tells the Noldor to leave Beleriand and forsake their war against him. However, the sons of Feanor are bound to their oath to make war on anyone who should withhold the Silmarils from them. Morgoth hangs Maethrost upon a precipice of Thangorodrim by the wrist of his right hand, and there he would hang for the next 30 years. The rest of the Noldor arrive around the time the sun and the moon are created by the Valar, making this year one of the First Age of Middle-earth. This group is led by Feanor's half-brother and Galadriel's uncle, Fingolfin, who would become Morgoth's next challenger. In the year 5 of the First Age, Fingolfin's son, Fingon, with the help of Thorondor, the Lord of the Great Eagles, rescues Maethrost from Thangorodrim. Maethrost renounces his claim to the kingship of the Noldor, and Fingolfin is made the new High King. Over the coming years, Morgoth's spies believe that as the elves are making their settlements, they aren't prepared for military conflict. Morgoth sends out an army of orcs to attack. The main host attacks Dorthonion, while smaller groups go through Maglor's Gap and the Pass of Sirion. The Noldor, however, were anything but unprepared. While the orcs in the east and west are destroyed by smaller elven forces, Fingolfin in the west and Maethrost in the east strike back at the main host of the invading orc army. Most of Morgoth's force is defeated there in Dorthonion, with a small remnant fleeing toward Angband. The elves chase them down, and there, within the site of Thangorodrim itself, the Noldor slay the remaining orcs. This battle is known as the Dagor Agreleb, the Glorious Battle, as it is a huge victory for the elves. The Noldor set as much a border around Morgoth's land as possible. thus beginning the 400-year siege of Angband. During this time, Morgoth comes to realize orcs alone will not defeat the Noldor, so he devises new creatures of evil, the dragons. The first of these is Glaurung, who emerges without Morgoth's permission in 260 of the First Age. Despite an initial success, the young dragon is humbled by the elven archers and forced to flee back to Angband. Nearly 200 years later, however, as Glaurung is grown to his full might, Morgoth sends forth great rivers of fire over Ardgallen, burning many elves stationed throughout the land. As the elves are in disarray, Glaurung leads a force of Balrogs and an army of orcs, killing all in their sight. This battle can be looked at on two fronts, the east and the west. In the west, Galadriel's brothers Angrod and Agnor are killed fighting for their home realm of Dorthonion. Finrod, her last remaining sibling and lord of Nargothrond, would have been killed as he is surrounded at the Fen of Serek, but a group of men led by Barahir, a lord of the House of Beor, comes to their aid. Finrod would later give him a ring as a token of the everlasting friendship between their families, the Ring of Barahir, which would one day pass to Aragorn. In the end, the elves and men are able to keep the western realms of Hithlum safe. In the east, things do not go so well. This battle, known as the Dagor Bragollach, the Battle of Sudden Flame, not only costs many lives of elves and men, but it also breaks the siege of Angband, and allows Morgoth's forces to move freely throughout the north of Beleriand. Orcs take control of the lands of Lothlin, including the important positions of Maglor's Gap and Mount Rerir. Glaurung burns the lands between the arms of Gelion, and the Thargelion and Lake Helivorn are ravaged by Morgoth's forces. With many refugees fleeing to places like Doriath and Hithlum, the elves abandon their realm of Dorthonion, which becomes known as Tar Nufuin, Forest under Nightshade. After a year of smaller battles, the High King Fingolfin gets word of the devastation the war has wrought in Dorthonion and Lothlin. Seeing what he believes could be the utter ruin of the Noldor, he rides in anger across the scorched land of Anfauglith, coming to the very door of Angband to confront Morgoth. Thus he came alone to Angband's gates, and he sounded his horn and smote once more upon the brazen doors, and challenged Morgoth to come forth to single combat. And Morgoth came. That was the last time in those wars that he passed the doors of his stronghold, and it is said that he took not the challenge willingly, for alone of the Valar he knew fear. But he could not now deny the challenge before the face of his captains, for Fingolfin named Morgoth Craven. Therefore Morgoth issued forth, clad in black armor, and he stood before the king like a tower, iron-crowned, and his vast shield, sable unblazoned, cast a shadow over him like a storm cloud. But Fingolfin gleamed beneath it as a star, for his mail was overlaid with silver, and his blue shield was set with crystals, and he drew his sword Ringil, that glittered like ice. Then Morgoth hurled aloft Grond, the hammer of the underworld, and swung it down like a bolt of thunder, but Fingolfin sprang aside, and Grond rent a mighty pit in the earth. Many times Morgoth essayed to smite him, and each time Fingolfin leaped away, and he wounded Morgoth with 7 wounds, and 7 times Morgoth gave a cry of anguish, whereat the hosts of Angband fell upon their faces in dismay, and the cries echoed in the Northlands. But at last the king grew weary, and Morgoth bore down his shield upon him. Thrice he was crushed to his knees, and thrice rose again, and bore up his broken shield and stricken helm. But the earth was all pitted around him, and he stumbled and fell backward before the feet of Morgoth. And Morgoth set his left foot upon his neck, yet with his last and desperate stroke, Fingolfin hewed the foot with Ringil, and the blood gushed forth, black and smoking, and filled the pits of Grond. As he wounds the Dark Lord, Fingolfin dies. While he's victorious, Morgoth would not escape this battle unscathed. As he breaks the body of Fingolfin, he intends to feed it to his wolves. However, in that moment, Thorondor, the Lord of the Great Eagles, flies in and claws the face of Morgoth. He takes the body of Fingolfin and sets it upon a mountaintop overlooking the hidden city of Gondolin. King Turgon learns of his father's deeds from the Great Eagle and builds a cairn over Fingolfin. Morgoth is scarred from Thorondor's attack, and forever bears a limp from the wound of Fingolfin's blade. 10 years later, in 466, two others would come to Angband, Beren and Luthien. When Beren, a man, and Luthien, an elf, wished to be married, Luthien's father, King Thingol of Doriath, declares that Beren may only have his daughter's hand if Beren succeeds in reclaiming a Silmaril from Morgoth's crown. Beren embarks on a mission to do just that, and after being rescued from the dungeons of Sauron in Tol in Galroth by Luthien and Huan the Hound, the three make their way to Angband, disguised by the power of Luthien. They enter the very throne room of Morgoth, and as the Dark Lord is about to order them seized, Luthien weaves a spell and begins to dance. The spell puts Morgoth and his entire court into a deep sleep. Beren approaches Morgoth. Using his knife, he cuts a Silmaril from the Iron Crown. He decides to retrieve all 3 Silmarils, but as he is cutting a second loose, the knife breaks and a shard strikes Morgoth in the face. As the court begins to stir, Beren and Luthien flee for their lives. Now, I'll be covering the life of Beren and Luthien in next week's video, but this particular Silmaril is never brought back to Morgoth, though it would cause further conflict with the Dark Lord and within the forces of his enemies. It is upon hearing the deeds of Beren and Luthien that 2 alone could successfully retrieve a Silmaril from Angband that moves Maethros in 468 to create an alliance to attack Morgoth. In 469, Morgoth sends forth a wind from Angband. It comes to the lands that border Anfauglith, in particular the lands to the west, like Dor-lómin. This plague, known as the Evil Breath, particularly affects the young, and many die from it, including Lalaith, the 3-year-old daughter of Hurin, the Lord of Dor-lómin. The men of Dor-lómin would join many others in the Union of Maethros, and in 472, fight in what would be one of the most important conflicts of the First Age, the Nirnaeth Arnoediad, the Battle of Unnumbered Tears. The Union of Maethros consists of 2 armies, one in the west, one in the east. In the west, Fingon leads the Noldor of Hithlum, Hurin and Huor lead the Edain of Dor-lómin, Haldir, the man, not the elf of the Third Age, leads the Edain of Brethil, Gwyndor leads the elves of Nargothrond, and there were also a few scattered elves from Falas and Doriath, including Mablung and Beleg Strongbow. In the east, Maethros commands his elven host. They are joined by Azagal and the dwarves of Belegost. They also had 2 groups of men with them, who had recently relocated to Beleriand after the Dagor Bragollach. These men, known as Easterlings, are under the command of their leaders Bor and Uldor. The plan is simple. The forces of the east would march to Anfauglith. Their hope is that Morgoth would respond by sending his armies to meet them. The western host would remain hidden in the woods and valleys east of the arid Wethrin. There they would await a signal. A great beacon in Dorthonion would fire, at which point the western host would charge, and they would crush the forces of Morgoth, as if caught between hammer and anvil. As Maethros leads his force to Anfauglith, a dark cloud gathers around Thangorodrim. Morgoth has accepted the challenge. As the western host waits, they are joined unexpectedly by a host of 10,000 elves, led by Turgon, brother of Fingon and king of the hidden city of Gondolin. Their might greatly increased, the outlook is promising for the Union of Maethros. However, in that very hour, Morgoth implements his plan. A great host issues from Angband to meet Maethros, but at the same time, a smaller host is sent west with the task of provoking the western army. Fingon orders his troops to hold until the orcs attempt to attack the hills on which they stand. At this point, the orcs bring forth Gelmir, the brother of Gwyndor. Having been already blinded, his arms and legs are hewn from his body. Filled with rage, Gwyndor and his soldiers charge at the orcs. Fingon's force follows, and they quickly defeat the smaller host and strike upon the very gates of Angband. In this moment, Morgoth once again knows fear, shaking upon his throne as Gwyndor's elves pound on the gates and kill his guards. However, the Dark Lord's trap was now sprung. Thousands of orcs erupt from hidden tunnels and gates around Angband, killing the entire force, with the exception of Gwyndor, who is captured. Fingon's host is driven back from the walls. Turgon, who had held back from the reckless charge of Gwyndor, drives into the orc host and breaks their lines, meeting with the host of Fingon. Finally, Maethros arrives at what is now the main concentration of the battle. However, before he can join with Fingon and Turgon, Morgoth unleashes the last of his strength. All of Angband is emptied as wolves, balrogs, and dragons join the fray. Though daunting, it is said in this moment the battle could still have been won, but for Morgoth's secret weapon. Uldor and his group of Easterlings turn against Maethros. While the Easterlings under Bor would remain faithful to the elves, the damage has been done. With assault coming from 3 sides, the eastern host is scattered. The valiant dwarves of Belegost hold off Glaurung, allowing the sons of Feanor to escape into Osiriand. As the dwarves in their iron masks fight the dragon and his fire, Azaghal is trampled by Glaurung. The dying king stabs the dragon in the stomach with a dagger, and Glaurung and many others flee. The western host fared no better. Gothmog, the Lord of Balrogs, makes his way to Fingon and kills him in single combat. Seeing the battle is lost, Hurin begs Turgon to retreat back to Gondolin. With Fingon dead, he knows Turgon is the last of the House of Fingolfin. If the land of Gondolin can remain hidden, and the son of Fingon who had maimed him survived, Morgoth would still know fear. Hurin and Huor and the men of Dor-lómin form a living wall across the Fen of Serek, giving time for Turgon to escape with what remains of the elves of Gondolin, and those who followed his brother. Nearly every single man is killed. Huor is killed when shot in the eye with an arrow, and Hurin fights to the very last. As Morgoth had been ordered for him to be taken alive, Hurin continues fighting until his axe withers away. In total, he kills at least 70 orcs and trolls before being pinned under their corpses. The orcs make a pile of bodies on the plains of Anfauglith of the men and elves that were killed. The mound was so large it could be seen from a great distance. Thereafter, grass grew on that hill alone in all the desolation of Anfauglith, and it is known as the Haud en Nirnaeth, the Hill of Tears. The Nirnaeth Arnoediad is a devastating loss for the elves, men, and dwarves of Middle-earth. In the years and decades to come, it will often be referred to with great sadness and acknowledging this as the moment when Morgoth assumed his control over the entire north of Beleriand. Soon he will press his advantage even further, but first he will lay a curse upon his prized captive, Hurin, that will shape the world for years to come. And that is where we'll pick up in my next video, the epic conclusion of the story of Morgoth. Apologies that this ended up being a 3-parter, but I couldn't do justice to this story if I trimmed it down. To make it up to everyone, I'm releasing 2 videos next week, Morgoth Part 3, as well as the complete life of Beren and Luthien as a special Valentine's Day release. Be sure to hit subscribe and the bell so you don't miss it. As always, I want to say a huge thank you to my Patreon supporters, including Tom DeBombadil19, Sky Carcass, Salim Rahman, Jim Limber Davis, Smorzerk, Matt Schultz, Zetrock, Gimilcod, Game Strategy Nerd, and Debbie. Thanks so much for watching and subscribing, and we'll see you next time on Nerd of the Rings.